Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. The topic of this 10-minute moan is me revisiting the topic of do you want to bury the SNP? Now, I've spoken about this before, but I thought it would be wise to re-investigate the subject and the topic as we get closer to election day, right? So, the first thing we need to do is, well, is it possible? Well, yes, it is, and that's based on their finances. But why should we do it? Let's look at that first. And I don't believe this is just a question for unionists. Because, as I've said many times over the last couple of months, Scotland has ruined Scotland for the unionist, but it's also wrecked the independence dreams of the nationalist. And what I find, more and more people on the national side each day turning against the SNP. And that completely makes sense to me, because they provide no actual manageable route to independence. What they're trying to sell you in this election is just vote for them because they wrote independence on the first page of their manifesto. But they only spoke about how they were going to do it in one paragraph on page 9 of their multi-paged manifesto. And what they are telling you as the voter they're going to do is, if they win the most seats at the election, which is looking highly improbable as each day passes, if they got 29 seats, they would then go to Westminster and demand a referendum based on a mandate by the Scottish electorate, at which point Westminster would say, well, hold on a minute, you get 32.5% of the vote, how's that a mandate? Right? And quite rightly, fling them out. Therefore, end the planned route they've got and the planned route they're selling to Scottish people to achieve independence. It simply won't work, right? But we should be used to that, because they've always put plans since 2014 on the table that just simply wouldn't work. But nationalists who are almost cult-like in their thinking, which is obviously not all of them, right, keep buying it. But a lot eventually get to a point where they go, you're talking shite, I can't put up with you anymore, I'm not voting for you, right? And that's where they are. Now, why do I want them banished to the history books? Well, that's quite simple. In 17 years of power, they have done nothing constructive for this country. Now, they might want to put wee tables up and say, we gave you free prescriptions, which we've always had, but all they've done now is make people like me that could afford them no pay for them and burden that expense on to the NHS. They claim things like free tuition fees, which have always been available if you required a bursary. These things have been available since I was at the age of considering to go to university or not. Okay, so it's all just bollocks. And again, what's happened with that poster policy is Scottish universities now have a cap on the amount of Scottish kids they can bring in, and they need to try and get more foreigners in, right? So is that clever? Aye. And the other thing it's done, it's made almost a postcode lottery of your chances of your child going to university. Now, my own son went to university, and he was given an easier amount of grades to achieve to get to his chosen course because of not the postcode he lived in, but the postcode of his school. That meant if he went to a school, stayed in the same place, he's lived, brought up in the same environment, but went to a school in the opposite direction, he would have got a higher grading that he had to achieve to get to university. So we're making it a postcode lottery, and more difficult each day because they're reducing numbers of Scottish kids. Now, thankfully, my own son managed to achieve his qualifications it required without any of this assistance, but that's the situation we're in. So they keep putting this stuff on. I mean, free buses for kids, right, for under 21s, £300 million it cost, right? And no great advantage whatsoever, right? So it's just all bullshit that actually bankrupts Scotland as a country. And they put these up as, what makes Scotland different? Well, it actually makes Scotland worse when you actually sit down, take your national sunglasses off, and look at what's in front of you. Their policies are total pish, and they actually cost the public purse fortunes, which means every penny the public purse has got is a prisoner. But instead of being put into things like NHS, like roads, like education, these things, it puts more strain on these services because they're taking it out, the money that could have come in for tuition fees, for free prescriptions, for these free stupid bus passes, just all puts a strain on other things. So that's part of the reason. that I think they should just get binned, full stop, forever, right? The other thing that they've not done is they've not just accepted the result in 2014 referendum and managed Scotland using the rule book that they had called devolution. If they had done that, Scotland would have been a better place. There's no, if anybody wants to argue about that, go out there and howl at the moon, right? Because I ain't listening, right? Scotland is a worse place now than it was when they took over. That's simple. Now, if you want to accept that but still be a cult member for SNP, you'll shout Brexit, Westminster, all that shite, right? And never ever once consider that the Scottish Parliament could have done a better job in the last 17 years. Okay? The way they conduct themselves does me nothing. And one thing that's come up quite a lot during this election is Brexit, right? And how Brexit's a bad thing, and the whole of Scotland's pish because of Brexit, and if we were independent, we'll get straight into the EU, right? Are you aware that in 2019, I think it was March 2019, the UK Parliament at Westminster had a vote in the House of Commons on whether or not we should have a trading deal, customs deal, with the EU. Now that's something that the SNP hold up now and say is a bad thing that we don't have that, and that's why the world's so bad, right? But when we voted on that thing in March 2019, every SNP MP abstained from voting. If they had voted and voted for it, this thing that they tell you is really important now, 4 or 5 years later, we would have had it. Because the vote only lost by about 7 votes. It was under 10 anyway, right? And the SNP had loads of MPs down that time. But no, the SNP whip was, don't vote for that. So this thing that they changed history by not voting on and abstaining, they now tell us all is the biggest problem about Brexit, right? That's how they govern. They are complete nutters. And that is one of the reasons I believe that they should be banished to history. Now, on to how do we do it and how, well, this is dead simple. Their accounts which are actually published, finalised for last year are not publicly available yet. They would need to be submitted by now, and they don't normally get published by the Electoral Commission until about August, right? So we're probably about 6 weeks away from seeing them. But the last set of accounts they put out for the year previous, which would have been December, the calendar year of 2022, there was no general or Holyrood elections, and they lost their second biggest amount of money ever of £800,000. Not the government, not Holyrood, the SNP as a party. Some people have difficulty differentiating between the two. I know that because that's how we've been sold it for 17 years. But the SNP party lost £800,000 and they had about 40 to 60 grand in the bank. Can't remember. Let's just say 50 grand, right? So they came into the calendar year of 2023 with 50 grand in the bank and just lost 800 grand. So, in their income, they have £1.2 million of what we call short money, which is paid by the Westminster government, UK government, so they can run as opposition, right? They also take about £500,000 off the parliamentarians in what they call ministerial levy. That is an amount of money they take directly off their MPs' wages. Everybody that's down there represent them, and I think it's about 15% of their wage or something like that. They take a chunk of that off. So in total there, you got about 1.7, 1.8 million quid that they get, not through fundraising, but just by being a party. And that number is based simply on one figure, the amount of parliamentarians they have. Because if they have half the amount of parliamentarians, that money would halve. And if you got down to zero, it would completely disappear. Now you need to consider what I told you 2.5 minutes ago. The last published set of accounts, they lost £800,000 without having an election to fight that year, by the way, and they had about 50 grand in the bank. What would happen if the Scottish electorate could halve the amount of MPs they've got? That would impact their income by about £800,000 to £900,000. That would put them in the bin. We can do that. And if we didn't manage to just tip them over the edge in this Westminster election, we could certainly put them in the grave at the next Holyrood election by doing this twice, right? So, How do we do it? This is very, very simple, or at least it's very, very simple for me. The reason it's very simple for me is I'm not a member of any political party. I don't actually like any of them. There's a couple of smaller parties and newer parties that I don't mind, but see your traditional parties, I'm no big fan of any of them, to be perfectly honest with you. And although I have voted Labour, Tory and Liberal Democrat in the past, and for independence, not independence, independence, big difference, right? So I've voted for different parties, and I've probably not voted for the same party twice in a row at any election. So it's easy for me to tell you what I'm going to do, and I am going to tactically vote. And that is whereby you use the, not old results, by the way, because the last election was 5 years ago and things have changed since then. So if you use the last result purely as your only thing to decide who you tactically vote for, you could be about to make a mistake, okay? But by using the information by folk far more clever and more intelligent on the subject than me, who can read polls, the data, and collate it and get it pretty damn close to deciding who is best placed to win a seat or run them close, right? And that will only be one party per constituency. And the dead simple way of actually getting into your head whether this would work or not is the fact that nobody wins a seat with 50% plus of the vote. So that means if everybody that doesn't like them votes for this one person, the SNP simply wouldn't win a single seat. Now, I know that's impractical and improbable, but it is possible, right? But what happens is we get people who spend 5 years telling us that the SNP are shite. They spend every day on social media telling us they don't like them, and then when they've faced with the opportunity of burying them, they want to give you excuses and reasons why they don't. And I've heard them all. And to be honest with you, I'm not interested anymore in listening to why people don't want to tactically vote and justify voting for somebody else. For the simple reason, your vote is your business, no mine. And if you decide not to tactically vote, and these words like, I'm going to have a protest vote by voting for this mob who are never going to win, then if you wake up on the 5th of July and your constituency returns an SNP MP, it's you that has to deal with that, not me. Now, I know who I need to vote for my constituency to hopefully stop the SNP returning an SNP MP. And I'm not particularly pleased about it, because there's a lot of things that they've got in the manifesto that I don't agree with, this party that I need to tick a box for. But the biggest driver for me in this election is getting rid of the SNP. I don't think it matters who is running Westminster in the next 5 years, because I don't think there's any of them are great, to be honest with you. But I think it's undisputable that Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That doesn't matter how I vote. So if I really didn't want him as a Prime Minister and I wanted to do something about it, it wouldn't work, because like, he's going to be the Prime Minister anyway. I hear some other odd things, like I couldn't vote for Sarwar because he's as racist as Yousaf. I've heard that. It's a Westminster election we're voting on just now. Sarwar isn't going to be the Prime Minister. He's not even going to go down and be a Member of Parliament. So that's kind of put that to the side. And that's really the crux of it. If you are happy inside your own conscience that your vote is going to somehow be a protest vote and not influence who goes down to be your Member of Parliament, and you're quite happy for that Member of Parliament to be an SNP, then do what you like. That's your choice, right? But then if you wake up the 5th of July and you go, shit, Tories were 2,000 behind, or Lib Dem was 2,000 behind, or Labour was 2,000 behind, and look at the amount of people that have voted for parties that were never going to win, you'll then realise the importance of tactical voting. But some of you won't. You still won't do it. And I really don't, I can't fall out with people for it, because I don't want to know how you vote. It's your personal relationship with a piece of paper and a polling booth. But if you don't tactically vote and you get an SNP MP and you want to moan about it on the 5th of July, then don't. You do not deserve the right to moan for voting for somebody who can he win and voting on who you wanted. Now, the person that you could have voted for, you might like them less than the one you voted for, but I'll guarantee you'll not like them less than the SNP one. And that goes for Nationalists as well as Unionists. And the Nationalists now have got, at least they've got an option in most constituencies where they can still vote for someone that they feel is not a Unionist, which that blows my mind. This thing that we've been sold to society, that if everybody else in the SNP is a Unionist party, when the reality is there's only one Unionist party in the United Kingdom, and the Unionists sort of gives it away by they're being called the Conservative and Unionist Party, right? The other parties just looked at independence when we had that choice and thought, probably better not with that. But if Labour or Lib Dems had a proposition in front of them that made bloody sense, then who knows? They might have wanted their party members to vote for a referendum. So this bollocks that the SNP tried, they done well with this bollocks theory that everybody else was a Unionist party apart from the SNP, because some people really bothered their conscience that they couldn't vote for anybody else on that basis alone. Which was quite a clever tactic. But now the Nationalists in some of their constituencies have at least got somebody else they can vote for, and that's Alba. Now, I think it's probably a stretch. Let's take it you live in a constituency that the tactical vote was for Tory, right? And you're a Nationalist. You might struggle with that. I totally understand that. But if you've got the option of Alba, you're actually going to benefit twice, because you don't need to vote for somebody, but by not voting SNP, you're in effect tactically voting and help drive the same outcome, which is probably a party that you don't want, right enough, getting an MP, but at least that party that you don't like won't be the SNP. So it is doable. It's very doable. All it takes is doing a bit. I'll put some links into some online assets that will show you where you should vote if you want to tactically vote. And it's very simple. And all you need to do is walk into a booth and say, I really do not like the SNP and I want to drive a stake into them and I want to be bankrupt. I'm going to put an X on that. Put your paper in the box and go home and enjoy not having an SNP MP and enjoy having played a part in bankrupting the SNP. So if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you think it makes sense, by the way, share it about your friends and colleagues and stuff. And if you've not already done so, please consider subscribing to the channel. But most importantly thing of all, unless you're John Swinney, the SNP, or any of the remaining cult members, everybody else, have a great day. Cheery bye now.